Hey friends, welcome back. Now, in the last video, I promised that we get started now with calculations and we dive now into calculated columns as well as measures, so DAX measures in Power BI. So let's explore that. At first, let's actually go, you don't have to do it, but let me click on the report view first, and then I click on transform data. Because the calculated column, we want to create this in Power Query, so in the editor. So I will click on transform data in here. Now the Power Query editor opens and I will go to my sales table here, this one. And what you can currently see is that we got a quantity column and we got a price column. So in order to calculate the total sales, we would simply multiply the quantity, in this case 4 for this first entry, with the price, which is in this case 1,848, to derive at the total sales for this specific order in this row, right? So to multiply quantity times price, we can create a so-called calculated column in Power BI. To do this, we can simply go to add column in here, so the third tab up here, and then we can say we want to create a custom column. So click on custom column. Then you'll see here a new window pop-up appears, and here we can name this column. Let's call this total sales and then column for now. You can name this whatever you want, but I just use total sales column. And then for the formula, we can simply refer to here, to this list, because here you can see all the different kinds of columns you already have, starting with the order ID, which is the first one here. And I want to multiply, as I said before, the quantity times the price. So you have two options. Either you click on quantity and go to insert, then you see that the quantity is now inserted. It always is inserted in brackets. So if you want to write the quantity yourself, you would have to enter the bracket first, and then you can write quantity. So just an example, if I insert the bracket here, then I get here as proposal the different kinds of columns. And if I type in Q, then you can see quantity selected. And if I press the tab key, then it's completely filled in here as well. So either you select it from here or you write it yourself. It's up to you. And I want to multiply this, that I'm using an asterisk symbol, and I want to use the price. Now, instead of clicking here and go to insert, you can also double click here. That would be the third option. So either you type it yourself and Power Query helps you to figure out what is the field. You press the tab key to fill it, or you select it from here, either by selecting once and go to insert, or you double click on the field. Next to that, you can see that there is no syntax error, which is good, which means the formula you have typed in is valid. If you would miss something, for instance, if I remove one of the brackets here, you see that now it gives you here a hint what's missing and why the error occurs. So that's why I can edit here, and then you see that it's fine. The formula should work. So that's good, and we are good to go. And to create this column now, this custom column, we can simply click OK. And as soon as we do this, let me click it, you see that now we have a new column in here, which is total sales. And we can see the numbers in here. And you'll see that if you want to multiply it, you can do it yourself, but 4 times 1,848 is exactly this value. And 1 times 1,725 is this value, and so on. So that's fine. The only thing which you need to be aware of is take a look at the column and the data type. You see that the calculation is valid, but currently Power BI has not detected the data type correctly. But we can easily change this. Simply click here and choose here in this case, because both of these are whole numbers in this data set, I can go with a whole number here as well. If you would have a price in decimal numbers, choose of course the decimal number. But for us now, I can simply go to whole number in here. Click it, and you see that now also the data type has changed here. And all those steps, just to highlight this one more time, in the applied steps window, there is this edit column which we have done, and also the change type of this column. And the original source looked like that without the column, right? So we have our additional column here, total sales, and now we could use this column in our report. So let's try that. Let's go to home and click on close and apply. Because remember, right now we have created it in Power Query Editor, but the column itself is not available in the report yet. Only if you click on close and apply, So let's click that. Then this total sales column is calculated now in the background and added to the table. And now if I take a look at my sales table here, I can see that there's an additional column, which is this total sales column, which by the way, you can make bigger if you don't see the complete text in here if you want. So far so good. We got our column. And now we can easily check this. Does this work? Let's go with our, or let's actually check it first. Let me tick it. And just a second, there's our bar chart. But let's actually visualize the number itself. So let's switch this from the bar to a card visual just to see the number. And we can see this is 26 million. And to see a little bit more detail, let's actually select the total sales column in here. And at first, let's actually switch this to, let's say, US dollar amount. Let's go in here. Okay, it's 25.66 million. And let's actually go or select the card first. Then go to the formatting pane here, format your visual. And then let's actually check that category label. Here we can see, let's make this bold here. So we can see that's total sales. And also for the call out value, let's actually go in here. And for the display units, just to show more, let me click on none. So we can see the complete number in here, right? This one here is the number in US dollars. I just did that so we can see exactly the number, because I will show you just in a minute a second way how we can get the same result using a DAX measure instead of a calculated column. But for now, that is the value we have. Okay, so at first, of course, let me say congratulations, because this is your first calculation in Power BI using a calculated column. Now let's also explore, does this work with our other tables? Because this only gives us the total amount of sales. But of course, we are interested, and all our colleagues as well, of course, are highly interested in what are the sales look like for each of the products, for instance, or each of the locations, or each of the customers. So specifically for one of our dimension tables here. So let's check that. Let me go to, in this case, the product table here. Let me choose here the product name. Let's click on product name, and we got a table in here. And you already know that you can simply switch this to, for instance, a bar chart as well. But for understanding the measures, I will start with the table, because I think this is the most easiest way to see that this actually works correctly. So here we got our products. And then let me add here now our calculated column. So the total sales column. Let's select one more time, make sure you have selected the table, and then click on total sales column in here. Check it. And now you see here the individual numbers. And at the bottom here for total, you can see 25,661,000 and so on, which is exactly the same number as here. And this tells us that this is correct. And we can now see directly here for each of the products we have the total sales. Let me just go to the formatting visual here and just make sure that for the values, I like to increase the text size a little bit so you can see that better on your screens. So let me just say 14 and hopefully you can see that better. So this means that now we have a breakdown of our total sales by each of the products. And the reason why this works, as you can see here, for each product, we got a different value. And the only reason why this works is because we have set up our data model correctly. Meaning, if I go to the model view here, let me check that, you see that our product table here has a relationship here using the product ID column to the sales table. And because of that, we can then slice each of the product names coming from the product table by, actually slice the sales table by each of the product names coming from the product table. If this relationship here would not be in place, then we would not be able, if I go back to the report view, to see these numbers in here. Instead, let me actually show you what happens if I go to the model view here and I right click on this relationship and say delete. Now I delete the relationship here. Yes, I want to delete it. And now you see that the relationship is broken. And if I take a closer look now to my report view again, watch what happens. Now each product here shows the total amount of sales. So the 25.6 million. Why is that? Well, the reason is that now, because we deleted the relationship, Power BI is not able to filter the sales table from which the total sales column is coming from by the products. because there is no relationship between those two tables. That is why let's actually use the product ID again. Let's drag this and drop it on product ID here just to set the relationship again. Now it's in place. And if we go back to the report view, we are good to go. And we can see that now the correct numbers are displayed. So just in case in the future, if you see the same number repeating, it could be the case that one of your relationships is not set up correctly. So that's why it's so crucial and important to check out the model view first and make sure that your data model is structured in the right way and all the relations which you need are actually in place. Okay? So, all right, so we can see the total sales in here. But one thing you might notice is in our data set, the products are actually, I can show this to you if I go to the data view here and select the products table in here. We see that the product structure actually is product 1, product 2, product 3, and so on, right? So this is the original structure in the table. However, if we go to the report view here, we can see that Power BI is sorting the data like that. So 1, then 10, then 100, then 101, and so on, right? Which actually is correct if you sort it ascending or descending, right? Depending on what you do here by clicking on these arrows here. As you can see here, I can tick this here, and then it's sorted ascending. I can click on it again. It would be sorted descending, as you can see here. So that's fine. But what if I like to have actually the same structure as in the table? So product 1, then product 2, product 3, and so on. This sorting option is not so easy available in here. I can't click on the little arrow here to sort. And I also can't click, the other option would be to click on the 3 dots here, more options. And there's also an option to sort by. And here I could sort by the total sales column, for instance. So to show me the product with the highest amount of sales, which could be helpful, definitely. But if I just want to sort my products in the by the original structure, I would have to do it differently. So what can I do? Well, if you go to the data view here, you can actually sort one column by another column, which means I could select my product name here. You now see that I have an additional tab here, column tools. And this tab allows me here, sort by column. So sort one column by the contents of another. Select the column to be sorted and the column you'd like to be sorted by. So that means I can click here and say I want to sort the product name, not based on the product name. Instead, I would like to sort the product name based on, in this case, the product ID. So I can select the product ID, tick this option. And if I do that, let's actually have a look at the report view. And now you see it is sorted correctly. Product 1, product 2, 3, 4, and so on. So also a little trick which you now know how to apply. So by default, you only have the option, click on the 3 dots here for sorting, or on the little up and down arrow to sort either ascending or descending, or sort by another column. For instance, by the total sales. Descending or ascending, it's up to you. Which you can also, of course, do by, if you hover over the column, clicking on these arrows. But if you want to sort your data based on the table structure, as we've seen here, then one trick would be to sort the column by another column. So that's why it's helpful if you have a sorting column in here applied. And in this case, we have it because the product ID is sorted correctly. So that's it for sorting. And now finally, let's explore how we can create the same calculation in here, so the same value, but instead of using a calculated column, we want to use a DAX measure for that. To do this, let's actually first deselect everything, and then let's take a look at where we can create measures. Now, we have actually several options to create them. The first one, if you take a look at the home menu, you can click on new measure. And of course, if you have it shrinked here in this view, then of course there's also an option to create new measure. Simply search for the calculator icon, right? So this would be the first option to click here. The second option would be to go to modeling, because there's also an option to create a measure if you click here. And the final option to create a measure would simply be to go to one of the tables, and if you right click on a table, for instance, the sales table here. I can right click here and I can say I'd like to create a new measure. If we do this, let's do that. Let me click on new measure here. And then just a second. Now you see in my formula bar here, there's the measure itself. So let me just make this bigger and let me zoom in so you can see that better. And now let's actually create our first DAX calculation. Now, remember, what did we do when we created the total sales column? We simply multiplied the quantity times the price, right? You're correct. And we did this for each row in a dataset. And that's the important thing. Because in order to calculate this number correctly, the total sales, we need to first multiply for each row in the data or in this set, so in this table, the price times the quantity. And then at the end, we need to sum all this up to get the 25 million, right? That's the way the calculation needs to work. And that is why for the measure here, let's call this total sales. Total sales. Again, you can name this differently if you want. I simply name it total sales. And by the way, names of measures and columns need to be unique. So you can't name, for instance, the second measure also total sales. These always are unique names. So what did I say? We need to multiply for each row in the dataset the quantity times the price, and then we want to sum it up. And this means we need an iterator function in DAX. Iterator simply refers to a term. It means we want to iterate through each single row in the table. That's what an iterator does. And to do this, we can use the so-called SUMX function. So SUMX here, this function, and if I press the tab key, let me just remove this, you see here what this actually does. So SUMX needs, in order to be evaluated, a table and then an expression. And if you read through it, returns the sum of an expression evaluated for each row in a table. So that means the following. It means we first need to give it a table, which is, by the way, true for all iterator expressions. You always need to add the table first, because the formula needs to know, okay, which is the table I should iterate on. So go row by row through this table. So that's why we refer to the sales table here, sales. Again, I simply type an S and then I press the tab key because it's the first option here. So that's my table. And then for the expression, I simply now can multiply for each row in the table, the same as what we've done before, the quantity times the price. So if I type in quantity here, I can see that's sales quantity here, and I can multiply this by the price. So if I type in PR, price here, and then I simply go down here to the sales price, select it, and then I'm good to go. So you see that in the formula itself, it refers at first to the table, which is the sales table, and then with the brackets here to the specific column inside the table. And now if I close this, close the parenthesis in here, we are good to go. So that's the measure. So one more time, it is an iterator function. That is why it iterates over a table, and that is why the first argument of the iterator function is always a table. And then we iterate, meaning we go row by row through this sales table and multiply the quantity times the price. And because we use a SUMX function at the end, this will be summed up. Exactly what we need. So now if I press enter, we can evaluate that formula. And you see that now the measure is created, highlighted here by the little calculator icon, which is different from the column, for instance. As you can see here, for the column, we only have the sum symbol because it's numeric. But for measures, we always have these calculator icons. So let me just make this smaller. By the way, the icon might change slightly in the future. So, but it still works the same way. We got our measure. Of course, I can go in here. I can zoom out if I want, make it smaller. But now let's actually visualize that. Let's also use a card. Let's tick the card option here. And then also place the total sales inside. And we can see we got 26 million. Of course, let's actually format this just to make sure that we get exactly the same value as here. If I select it, you see that there's an additional tab, which is called Measure Tools. And here I can also specify I would like to see this as US dollars. So tick this option in here. And then let's also say here for the measure itself, let's say here for the formatting, go under the Format Your Visual here options and go to the callout value here. And let's say here also for the display units, let's say none. And if we do this, we can see we got exactly the same value in here as we got up here with the calculate column, right? Of course, there's also a category label here. Let's also make it bold. So the total sales is also bold. But we see that this is a second option to get exactly the same value. And if I go to my table, just to make sure that this also works in the table structure, let's actually click on total sales, tick this option here, and you see that you got exactly the same values for each of the products. So that means we can use a calculate column or we can use a measure and we get exactly the same results in here. So now, of course, the question might arise, well, if you can use both, what should I use? That is a very good question. And the answer is actually quite simple. Whenever possible, you should use measures, not calculate columns. Why is that? The reason is the following. If you take a closer look, for instance, only in the data view, then you see that for each calculate column, this column is really created. So it is available inside the model, which means it requires size. And that means the model gets bigger. Now, the more calculate columns you create, the bigger the model gets. And a bigger model means that actually your Power BI report might become slower. And this is something you want to avoid. Of course, if you have a small model, it doesn't really make a difference. But just to consider it best practice, if you don't need a calculate column, don't create one. Instead, use the measure option. Because this total sales measure, and that's the main point, the main benefit of measures, this is created on the fly. Meaning, you see that there is no column stored somewhere. For instance, in the sales table, where the measure currently resides, there is no total sales column in here, right? The measure itself only has the formula, and whenever we use the measure in one of the visualizations, for instance, here in the card, or here in the report, only then it is calculated by Power BI on the fly. And that means we do not need to store any additional column or data. It simply is there for us and can be used, and only if we use it, then it needs to be calculated. And this is more efficient. That is why it's best practice to refer to measures instead of calculate columns. The reason why calculate columns exist is that for some certain kinds of options, you can't use measures. For instance, if you want to use or calculate something like the product name in here, like product 1, product 2, and so on, or let's say you want to create something like if sales are above 20,000, this would be, or for a customer, this would be a very valuable customer, and so on. So certain kinds of dimensions, in this case, I call it this way, but certain kinds of columns, you only can create using calculate columns. So as a maybe a way to remember that is whenever you want to create something numeric, you probably can do it with a measure, and you should do it with a measure. But if it's a text or string value you want to use as an axis, for instance, in a chart, anything like that, then you probably need to refer to calculate columns. That is the main difference here. So you can't use measures for everything because they're calculated on the fly, but still for numerical values, most often you can use them actually, and I would highly encourage you to do that because that's best practice, okay? So hopefully you understood that, and also congratulations because you also have now created your first DAX calculation. So that's it for this video, quite long, but hopefully very interesting, and thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.